In 1972, 10 years after independence, since this is the context of the conversation, we were supposed to have universal primary education. Now, you talked about these Scandinavian countries. Now, this Republic of Uganda, at independence, had visionary leaders, since you talk about leadership, who had an idea for a country and an idea of how to transform this country and make it a country that belongs to the rest of the world at par.
This is the Policy Digest, a Center for Policy Analysis podcast that explores how African societies are governed and how people and their leaders are shaping the future of their communities. Through candid conversations and insightful analysis, we aim to provide a deeper understanding of the political, economic, and social landscape of Africa. So sit back, relax, and get ready to explore the diverse and dynamic world of African governance.
Most welcome to the Policy Digest. I must say we have loved having you here. I hope you enjoy the content we've been putting out there on all our podcasting platforms. You're most welcome. In this series, we're going to start a series to reflect on Uganda's independence, to reflect on our past, to reminisce the present, and recreate the future. Imagine what it could be. And in this specific episode, we shall be looking at the contribution of the Uganda People's Congress to Uganda's civilization after independence. My hope is that after this episode, you'll know the story behind the story. You know, sometimes we are told of so many stories about UPC and our political education, but it's good to get people who were firsthand in those regimes, in those times, and they tell us the stories we could miss, the kind you don't find in books, or the context that is necessary for us to appreciate where we come from. In order to do that, we're joined by Mr. Joseph Ochieno, who is a UPC presidential candidate, and I must say UPC diehard. Mr. Joseph, you are most welcome to this podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. You've got a fantastic studio, fantastic team, and although a little difficult to find where you're located, it's very quiet, studious, and I think anyone associated with you must have the serenity to read, learn, interrogate Uganda's history, and hopefully with confidence build a foundation on which UPC did and ensure that this country is better than what it is at the moment, because that's exactly what our founding parents did.
Oh, thank you. And I wanted to just start at that very note. So from 1987 upwards, you left the country after President Museveni gained power in 1986. Could you walk us through what could have triggered you to leave the country?
Yes, I still don't know why I was arrested. Since Museveni, now 37 years later, he's still in charge. And I was arrested 18 months after he had taken power. So he was very, very much settled, so absolutely in charge. He could not say that some funny advisors of his who were in charge of situations, including, in any case, seeking to go and arrest an average young student from Makerere University. So he must know, so I really hope he's able to tell me. And I really hope he's able to tell me that before he retires. And I really hope...
you were arrested by his army just
yes.
in that year when they had come to power?
Yes. No. They came to power in 1986, but I was arrested on November 2nd, 1987. I am asking for that because within the context of this conversation, I had joined Makerere in September 1985. Extremely unlucky that I joined the university under a dictatorship, but delighted that I did my A-level exams under a democracy. I am very saddened that I attended my primary education under dictatorship. But I can tell you that all those experiences I had feel excessively privileged compared to what an average young Ugandan kid from Chinoni, from Mbirizi, from Moyo, perhaps from even the outskirts of Rukunjiri, but certainly not from Nagongera today, would live the life that I went through. Because although it was a modest life, born of a primary school, grade 1 teacher who then later on becomes a mini catechist and retires to work on public roads, I was able to start primary living in the year after Min had taken over power. But when I started primary school, on day one, I became a class prefect. But on that day one, we had everything in Nagongera Primary School. We had absolutely everything that an average primary school one child would have. I sat on a normal desk. I sat in a cemented classroom. I sat where there's chalks and crayons and boards for young primary one kids to play around with and to learn to count and to write and to
That
draw.
is
1972, 71, 72. They were there. Granted, Amin had just come over, but this is the foundation of our independence, and I'll give you the context. Since you started me from 86 and with my life. So I'll bring in the import of our independence. And I started by being lined up, with 5 other pupils under a mango tree. Of course, primary kids want to bring them outside the class. But there was a classroom to be elected. I was elected overwhelmingly, and it was quite embarrassing, actually, if I can remember that, because of the 5 of us, one person, I think, did not get anybody lining behind him. Another person, I think, got 2. One other person possibly got 4, 5.
Okay.
The next other person, I think, got 7, but all of them are members of his family. That is whom I remember very well. His family is from near the primary school. So, and the rest of the class lined up behind me. And if I can remember, I was sort of, interestingly, the smallest, may not necessarily been the youngest, but the smallest in class. So it was a fantastic stuff. But then that day meant for me that not only was I starting school, but I was beginning the appreciation of democracy and perhaps the privilege around it, since I was now the number 1 star citizen on that. But fast forward, I remember from then on, I also became the number 1 throughout, including jumping classes, and also therefore including my primary living exams, and also beating the majority of the people in the whole of Greater Bukedi and going to Miri later. But why I'm saying that is, go to primary 2. Primary 1, as a class monitor, I was responsible for collecting those crayons and those boards. So basically the classroom manager. And I can tell you and can confirm, this is a republic founded at independence for God and my country. So we don't tell lies. So clearly everything was there. In primary 2, we now have cupboards with lockers. And so I am the one who opens and locks, not the teacher. We started having exercise books, because then now you could use books.
Was that funded by the state, or was it funded by parents? How was the education system then?
It's interesting. You rush to ask that question when I'm giving the background, because I know you genuinely don't know. And I know the majority of your audience may not know, particularly Ugandan audience.
Oh, yes.
And that, it emphasizes the reason why I have to start with it.
That's true. Very important
and
context,
so,
yeah.
Once you've completed a book, whether it's writing or drawing or mathematics, you bring the book to me. I check it to make sure that it's completely used it well.
The class
monitor. This is now primary 2. I was a prefect throughout. And I go to the cupboard, get a new exercise book. Together with the one, I take it to the class teacher, who basically just writes the other name, because as well as that time I couldn't write. And in any case, the teacher's role. So I did that. To the textbook, starting primary 2, every pupil had a book. So we had enough books in primary, starting from primary 2 where I needed books. Every book enough for a child. In primary 1, we had counting sticks. And these are much organized counting sticks, not from the forest of Namambe, broken for firewood, but normal organized counting sticks that I'm sure the children in Japan would use today. We had it in this country, and we had it in my classroom in Agongera. So we did that. So fast forward, I can confirm that that is the quality of education that I went in throughout my primary school. So I jumped from P3 to P5. My mother was hesitant, but I think I'll leave some of this for my memoirs. My mother was hesitant. My headmaster said, no,
he's far beyond.
He's fine.
P3,
and
yeah.
yes, in any case, we will deal. And there was no need, because I went to P5 and became second the first term, and the second term I came fifth. My sister taunted me, my elder sister, late married. And then my mom told her off, but in the final term I was the best in class. So I moved on. I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about my experience, but also linking my experience to the possibilities that decent education can have, meaning environment.
Has happened before.
I credit this to my family. I credit this to my faith. I credit this to my decency. But I credit this fundamentally to the environment that it was, the school, the teachers, the facilities, the head teacher, and the community. You asked me how. These were public schools, fully publicly funded. Whereas primary and secondary education, meaning all-level education, was the only education which was not free in this country. I repeat, the only education that was not free in this country
was secondary education.
Primary and all-level education. The rest of education, until NRA came to power,
was publicly funded.
Fully publicly funded.
In short, we had a Finland in the 1970s and...
That's correct, and better. Yeah, certainly, and I'll come to that. But number 2, whereas the education was not free, it was highly subsidized. Meaning, first, what the parents pay for school fees in primary was more subsidized, and your researchers can go and check, per dollar, more subsidized than the amount of money per child that this NRA regime today pays in the name of universal primary education.
The capitation grant, 5,000 per child?
That is actually criminal. So that's £1, so meaning $1.3 or something
really,
like that.
About that.
So it was highly subsidized, but not free. Secondary education was highly subsidized, but not free. I am lucky I had it free, because on the basis of my performance, I got a scholarship from local government, which is still government, So I did not pay school fees in Mwiri. But you then go ahead and pay for these Parents and Teachers Association. Those are always there. There is not what they call the building funds, and normally those schools will do that because parents are making contributions to maintenance, refurbishing. That was there. Beyond that, whenever you had your parents or grandparents talk about school fees in the 70s and the 80s and 60s, that is the context. Meaning primary education and lower secondary education, parents paid fees, but in that context. So in relative terms, the state catered for everything else. Let me reemphasize, therefore, that the crayons, the chalks, the wardrobes, the seating, the cupboards, and everything else was fully publicly paid. Are they there in most average primary schools today? No.
No.
The teachers, from Mr. Vincent Tulo, my first teacher, and Lucy Hagege, my favorite primary school teacher, fantastic. Lucy Hagege came all the way from Busia, where the other day NRA was having fun, And the year I started primary 1, the primary school 2 teacher, I don't remember her name, she came all the way from Mo in West Nile, meaning a primary grade 2 teacher from West Nile is posted to Tororo. The reason was that her salary was more than sufficient to cater for her and her family, including possible transportation, should she require to go and visit her relatives in West Nile. Therefore, also given the economic context, per pound, per dollar, per shilling, the wage, the strength of our shilling, and also, if you like, the cost of living, and whether you link the living wage then to the realities. So then if teachers got those...
Maybe just something small. Maybe just something small. You know that 2001, 2000 World Bank structure adjustment programs where there was a conversation on privatizing what government had as a firm grip on the provision of public goods, either through systems like taxation and then the provision of those free services, or using public companies that then they sort of... Do you think the approach of government to privatize, to prioritize a private-led economy rather than one that is engineered by government, do you find that a much better option where citizens can have a choice to go to a private school rather than a government school, or where the government just provides that essential service?
You're mixing the point. The World Bank position on that was criminal. Museveni's regime's commitment to buy into the IMF and World Bank is criminal. And in any case, the move by Museveni, who claims to be a socialist and a Pan-Africanist, and if he understands the context of Pan-Africanism, a Pan-Africanist cannot be a bulldog for IMF and World Bank and Bretton Woods institutions. A Pan-Africanist, from an ideological perspective, cannot subject an average African child and African future to the whims of Western influence, excess, capitalist exploitation. In any case, those private education in the 60s and 50s, 60s and 70s, they were there. In my time, they were there. But that's why I'm trying to say that you choose...
But public schools were even better.
Not even. Public schools are supposed to be better, and they were better. And the people who killed public schools, Museveni and his team, they killed public education. That's my point. So I was saying that when I sat for my primary living exams, I sat for the same exams with every pupil in this country. And so when I went to Mwiri in my senior one, I sat in the same class with the best people in this country. And that people had come from Nakasero Primary School. Now, somebody would need to be crazy to come from Nagongera, to be living modestly in Nagongera, to sell the entirety of their livelihood in order to take their child to a Seeing Museveni private Uganda Limited school in Golf Coast Club. It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't, because even public schools, I think at the moment they charge up to $500. Some go up to $600 actually if you put it in its summation. So is it your argument that let's say the UPC government post-independence was a bit more socialist and less capitalist?
I don't know what you call a bit. You can't be a bit socialist.
You choose. So were you entirely socialist?
And in any case, actually, this is also not a matter of ideology. I think you may then go ahead and mix it. And if it were a matter of ideology, then you'd mix the fact that public services are necessarily at the whims of capitalists. The state in America, the most capitalist state in the world, subsidizes public services, including education. The Musevenis, when they came from the bush, they applied the bush economics, and they had no clue, so they operated like agents. And so agents, they brought to the national disaster that we had. I am saying to you that the two Bote governments, if it's what you're referring to, the UPC government,
sure.
They're progressive left political government. And the government, where the state took the responsibility of the state. That's what our independence was all about, and the championing of independence to create an emancipation environment for our peoples. That's the role of the state. But the state creates an enabling environment for which, if there is an innovative Rashid, who goes into innovation and technology and creates his business and wants to be like the next Bill Gates, he will have been educated like Ochieno in Agongara Primary School, because
they don't need to go to Washington.
His parents did not necessarily afford, or that was his mandatory privilege to go to Kawempe Public's primary school, secondary school, and from Kawempe do well enough to go to Chambogo Technical Institute, as it was at the time, and so maybe Chambogo University of Science and Technology, as UPC then would design it. So he specializes in innovation and becomes the best engineer, in this case possibly software engineer, and does so better than MIT in the US, and becomes a better engineer than most in NASA in America. And if he does that, and through his innovation, he goes ahead and sets up his private facility in the outskirts of Kampala, not in Namamve Forest to kill the environment, but possibly go somewhere in Nakasongola and gets the space. A sensible government does not matter. The ideological leanings should be able to enable him, possibly even give him subsidies, and possibly create enabling environments for which subsidies, or perhaps give him a tax break as he sets up his innovation center for Uganda, innovation center for East Africa, innovation center for Africa. That is nothing to do with ideology. But in any case, if part of your question was about private versus public education, throughout my primary education, throughout my secondary education, and up to my university education in this country, there was absolutely no need for an average bright child. I'm going to be a bit cheeky here. An average bright Ugandan child, yeah? There was no need for him or her or their parents to take them to a private school. And I'll tell you.
Because government schools were...
Government schools, I want to insist using the word public schools, government schools were the best. They were there because they're sufficiently catered for. And in any case, Rashid's parents paid taxes. Government schools are publicly funded institutions.
And people should be getting the benefits
and people should be able to get the benefit, and they did. And so then, if you want to play posh, those days, your child was stubborn, you went to Namasagali College.
Yeah, those schools which are now a shadow of their former
No, but Namasagali was a private missionary school, and fully private missionary school. But I'm saying the rest of the other schools which are directly, formally, public state, including missionary schools like Mount St. Mary's and Namagunga. They're public schools, but missionary public in the sense that government in 1963 deliberately made sure that all missionary schools were embedded with state schools, that Kibuli SS for Muslim schools, you can do your Muslim jihad and everything else, and teach the Quran and pray in Islam. But if Joseph chose that they want to take their daughter to Kibuli, she puts Kibuli first grade for a PLE. She qualifies to go to Kibuli because you just don't do the back
on merit,
door. On merit, you go to Kibuli. You go to Kibuli. Now, Kibuli was obliged to cater for the needs of all the children. That's from 1963. That's what UPC did for this country, and that's what UPC did for our independence, meaning you create that diversity. And so, likewise, for me, I'm a Catholic background. I went to Boston College, Miri, on the instruction of my headmaster, who himself was Catholic, as it were. But his view, it was the best school, and I still believe it's the best school and it will be the best school in the future. But I had wanted to go to St. Mary's, Kisubi, where my cousin was. And my mother wanted me to go to St. Peter's in Toro because it was a local nearby school. And my headmaster had a different opinion. I had, as I said, I was amongst the best in the country, so I had the grades to go to any other school.
Any school, sure.
But what I'm saying here is, if after the selection, and those selections, they would do selection collectively, after the selection for senior one for the top schools that have been done, if you came to Mwiri and your name is not in the list, you will be known to have come through the back door. And once in a while, those were there. And once in a while, some of those would be circumstantial back door. I use a good back door. The good back door was the children who came from exiles in 1979. And many of them joined us from the Liberation War from Tanzania. Henry Keloriem, who, is one of them, I recall, the head of us. So, yeah. So you would go to these public schools and get spaces and join those schools. But what we, the students, would think of you would say that, well, you jumped the queue, you went through the back door. And honestly, actually, we always felt and believed you are not clever. So you did not meet the bar. So that is the beauty of public education, starting from primary, secondary, and indeed, as I said, after the
and I think we've had quite an extensive discussion on social services, Bote 1 or Bote 2, and what has changed. Maybe to then look at the approach to leadership. How different is the approach to leadership for UPC or Bote 1 or Bote 2, and what happened post-1986? What are the crucial contrasts we can construct?
I really don't want to go to that before concluding one small item on context on education, because that thing is very important. Education is the number one equalizer in society. And I cannot accept that as part of my campaigns, globally outside UPC and outside polity, I would seek to let it go, that children of Karamoja and children of Chinoni become expert askaris and their futures are killed in the streets of Kampala because of government policy, and so hence linked to your second question on leadership. But I want to remind you and most of your generation viewers that not only then was primary education free, I mean, as subsidized as it was, but that if you did your primary living exams, obviously granted this over 50 years ago, starting the policy, but it was as recent as 40 years ago, you could go to become a grade 2 teacher, become a nurse, do another technical training, do secretarial work after primary living exams. All the courses that you'd attend would be free, publicly funded, at least in public institutions. Obviously, you can choose the others, but they were there and they're free. But number two, I want to say that my best teacher was merely a grade 2 teacher, Lucy Hagege. So meaning she would have finished primary living exams, PLE, and gone to teacher training school and become such a decent primary school teacher. So quality of education, what is it that has so gradually changed, so much changed, that we now have graduates, some of whom are from some of these dubious universities in the streets of Kampala, people who would struggle to compose a sentence.
And that's true.
And then you take it from primary, the same with secondary. But secondary was this, that after senior 4, education was free. So A-level education was free except for those things to do with uniforms and again some of this parent-teacher related kind of stuff. And then finally university education and all other post-university education was free. Free meaning publicly funded. Now the state managed to fund those things. Now today, those people in charge of our republic normally claim that the population was small. Granted, the population was small. But you guys who do policy work, you know that the population growth has been about 1.6%. And that's sort of amongst the highest in the world, But economic growth goes for 5% plus. Sometimes people boast about 7-8. So Mr. Museveni himself normally likes to talk about how the economy has expanded about 30 times. So if that's the case, it's a common sense mathematics that I studied in my primary school. So meaning therefore that, well, the capacity of the state today should be better. But this is the other secret, because I want to conclude this. In 1972, 10 years after independence, since this is the context of the conversation, we were supposed to have universal primary education. Now, you talked about these Scandinavian countries. Now, this Republic of Uganda, at independence, had visionary leaders, since you talk about leadership, who had an idea for a country and an idea of how to transform this country and make it a country that belongs to the rest of the world at par. So we were supposed to have universal primary education in 1972, but of course, through the government in 71. But now in Obote 2, we drew up again a 10-year plan. Universal primary education was supposed to start in 1991. That's why you'll have heard stories of what they used to call in the 80s third world schools. So they opened up primary, secondary schools in every sub-county, at least in my Tororo, certainly in my West Burama.
In Obote too. Every sub-county
had a school, and they were opening and they're being built on as the economy was being revived and revitalized. So that in 10 years, by 1991, education in this country was, as of 1981, supposed to be fully free universally from primary to university. But guess what? The vision of our founding parents for education was, you talked about Scandinavia, tell you about what it is like in Britain. Universally free and compulsory, meaning every child of school age must go to school, up to the age of 16, when you then want to go ahead and maybe go to technical institution depending on your skills. That is how nations build. That's how nations are founded. Those are what our founding parents, who started Uganda National Congress in 1952, thought about it. Our independence at the time was about the emancipation of African peoples in a country that was controlled by the British, white British, politically, but economically predominantly controlled by a minority of Asians.
I get you, and I wanted us to, in the second episode, to still pick the contrast.
Sure.
I see you're quite big on issues education and how UPC had a very deliberate policy to ensure education is sorted as a very vital, fundamental public good. In the second episode, I want us to draw parallels between things like corruption, things like militarization of politics, things like political harmony in terms of tolerating political opinions, and how UPC was approaching those specific perspectives.
The Center for Policy Analysis is an independent think tank shaping parliamentary democracy, governance, and public policy in Uganda and beyond. Our mission is to shape public policy and strengthen democratic governance by delivering high-quality research, fostering collaboration, and empowering citizens. Our vision is a democratic society with transparent, accountable, and responsive governance systems. What sets CEPA apart? A unique consortium model that integrates expertise from diverse partners for multidisciplinary approaches. We pioneer thought leadership, leveraging tools like artificial intelligence to enhance impact. Through collaborative advocacy, we empower stakeholders to engage with legislative processes, all while combining rigorous research with a deep understanding of Uganda's political economy. Our flagship initiatives include Parliament Watch Uganda, that bridges the gap between the citizens and Parliament. The Policy Digest podcast that explores politics and public affairs across Africa, and the CEPA Convo, our bi-monthly X-Space tackling key public issues. Our work spans parliamentary democracy, human rights, public health, road safety, climate justice, artificial intelligence, and more, including the Africa Regional Conference on Parliament and Legislation. Join CEPA in shaping policies, amplifying voices, and building a democratic future. Visit www.cepa.or.ug to learn more or follow us on social media. The Center for Policy Analysis, a leading public policy think tank.
I don't know whether we've read Okot Bitek, have we?
Oh, yes.
Songs of Lawin. I was reading them today morning, and there's a poem that they write. For those who have the latest edition, it's on 53. It's titled "The Graceful Giraffe Cannot Become a Monkey." He said that my husband tells me I have no ideas of modern beauty. He says I have stuck to old-fashioned hairstyles. He says, I'm stupid and very backward, that my hairstyle makes him sick because I am dirty. Akot Pitek is trying to recount that, especially politically, that there is evolution which can be looked at as good, using like the appeal to novelty, because something is new, then it is better than the past, without particularly paying attention to context. And if you've listened to a lot of political rhetoric in Uganda over the last 3 years, also I think America, you hear things like, we should not betray the vision of the founding fathers. How would the former leader have treated this specific case scenario? In your opinion, with regards to the public good of public health care, how did the UPC handle such issues? Because I was reading reports, and drug stockouts, basic drug stockouts have remained a persistent problem almost for, I think, the 10th parliament, the 11th parliament. I'm not sure whether the 12th won't also have the same problem.
You know, you asked me a question about leadership, which I don't think I responded, but it's also sort of linked to deliberate policy. And this clearly is a manifestation of the fact that since our independence, unfortunately, we have not, except for Milton Obote's two governments, we will not settled for governments that, one, are consciously mandated, but two, that we consciously critique and review. And in any case, except for the two Obote governments, the rest have been imposed militarily. So unfortunately, again, you can't blame the citizens for not critiquing them enough. In any case, the citizens never given them the authority.
There's no social contract.
But that said, also the people who've come to power outside Milton Obote, their object were, like in this NRA case, individualistic, personal merit driven. In some cases, has been very much about hegemonic agenda rather than nation building, or really what our founding parents did. So it's not surprising, nor should I expect much. So from what you're talking about drugs in hospitals, I sometimes feel sad, particularly that the Ugandans, including Ugandans who are well-read like yourselves and people who've managed to escape UPE, to believe or to think that there is something this regime can do after 40 years, something that a regime can do after 40 years that it would not have been able to manage to do. So there is no possibility that there will be any major structural changes as far as public health is concerned, education that I talked about, or anything else majorly, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in infrastructure, or in environmental policy, perhaps even in our foreign policy and defense.
They have tried every trick they had
because
in the book,
everything that they can do, they've tried to do.
Yeah.
To the extent that their foreign policy and defense policies are now managed by the family through a treaty. And all of it, management processes, completely defeats the most basics of international law, contradicts the constitutional provisions in this country, and contradicts an average common sense that anybody who's been part of global diplomacy would say. But look, not only did the founding parents at independence get driven by what they thought, which was basically the original independence thought, was that African person and personality, as an African person, would be emancipated. That not only would we choose to determine our destiny, and that our destiny was in our hands, but that we do so in such a manner that the African, as I said, takes charge instead of being the third-ranked citizen in his country, takes charge, and he are able to control the destiny as far as public health, education, agriculture, the livelihood, and, if you like, global citizenry, which is at par with everyone else. In health provisions, Obote One government built, and I mean built, 22 new hospitals in 8 years. The 22nd one was completed just after the coup, but it was about to be completed, and that's Busole Hospital, which happens to be in my former Bukedi, So that was the 22nd hospital. But all of them within a period of 8 years. Now, if you consider population per capita and the economic per capita at the time, those are, in today's figures, equivalent of about 154 or thereabout hospitals. And these hospitals were built across the country. A friend whom I met at a public event, a member of parliament, from the ruling NRS from somewhere in the West, told me just the other month that every time he passes Kagadi Hospital, he says that he would think, what was Obote thinking about to bring a hospital all the way in this place in the bush then at the time, all this far poor place. These places were built across the country, from Bugiri to Kagadi to Kriadongo to Abin, across the country. So meaning those are a government then that had leadership, had a vision, purposeful, nationalistic, and driven by the values for which our independence was fought for. So therefore deliberate in public services. But not only that, again, like I said in education, you had drugs, you had facilities for nurses and doctors and specialists, including accommodation, and these guys were well paid, meaning people were fully motivated. Those were for hospitals, those were for dispensaries that these days the NRA guys went ahead and gave them powerful terminology, health center 1, 2, 3, 4. We just know them as dispensaries. Granted, Nagongara would be the more senior dispensary health center 4, but the rest of the sub-counties, as they did for education, and for health was done actually in the 60s. If I use every sub-county at the time had a health facility built, fully equipped and staffed.
Primary school health facility.
Absolutely. Across the country. So that's public services. You can go to agriculture, and then I said, agricultural officers were also there by every sub-county, just as there were veterinary officers per health sub-county. So meaning, therefore, the citizen was fully catered for by the state at the time.
Yeah, so in Obote 1 and 2, we see that the military of the country had power, but that kind of power was not so repressive. It wasn't the kind that was harming individual citizens and harming political opponents. What is that the UPC was doing to ensure that you wield the power that can protect, but it does not go ahead to be used to entrench Obote? Because the military was that democratic that it actually almost removed him from power because of how empowered it was and independently.
No, I don't know whether you would say that the military was empowered, meaning that independent in a way. The anti-Obotists would suggest something else, but I think you're right. Obote 1 and 2 were democratically elected governments. Obote's governments, he led both governments, applied the rule of law and believed in constitutionalism and a constitutional order, a normal democratic constitutional order. The army subordinates to political authority. And if they are, that means that the army's job is to defend our national boundaries, our national borders, against external aggression. And unless you're like Museveni, you want to go and buy timber for free in Congo, you would send soldiers too. But that's basically the role of the army. Anything other than that is zero. The next other, you can use the army to bolster internal national security should need a rise, where in this case the normal civil forces, mainly the police, either don't have the capacity or are overstretched, or matters of strategic nature, or perhaps locations of strategic nature. That in a democracy should rarely happen. You could see Nobody too in trying to make sure that the army was not really anywhere near. The nearest element that you want to embed would be to make sure that the police has a unit which is slightly much more specialized, hence what then was called the special forces. But they were police officers and under the Inspector General of the Police.
Nonetheless, under the supervision.
Precisely.
Maybe just to follow up on that, you know how the NRM government has militarized almost government. We see UPDF officers in parliament, UPD officers being ministers, being civil servants, being permanent secretaries. How was it like in Obote's time? How the military interacted with the state?
Certainly not as it is, except that in Obote too, there's a continuation of members of parliament for the army. But that is following the overthrow of Idi Amin. The army had representatives in parliament, and that was basically an interim thing, and it was not in any case, as I said, post Amin, the interim administration was the National Consultative Council as parliament, and the UNLF as the political wing that then was headed by Lule, then Binaisa, and then the trio presidencies of Kikoncho and Wacha and others, but militarily headed by the military commission to whom they ceded power in Paul Mwanga's. So that was it. Ironically, though, of course, Idi Amin overthrew the government, and I think your question is important. Amin only managed to overthrow the government because he was subject to arrest by Milton Obote once he returned from Singapore, where he had gone to head the anti-Commonwealth group within the Commonwealth, following the campaigns for the liberation struggles in Southern Africa, where the frontline states, then led by Obote, Nyerere, and Kaunda, and Oliver Tambo of the African National Congress was president while Mandela was in prison, to push that unless Britain stops arms supplies to apartheid South Africa and revokes the support to Ian Smith's, again, Universal Declaration of Independence in Namibia, both of whom are basically apartheid white regimes, key Commonwealth countries were prepared to pull out of the Commonwealth, meaning kill the British Commonwealth as an organization. So by return, Britain, backed by the US, naturally using Israel, they persuaded Idi Amin to overthrow the government. Amin did so because Obote had sent him to Congo to support the Lumumbist forces, African liberation in Congo. And Amin got involved in what I'm sure you and many of your young viewers that have heard as the gold scandal. That gold scandal was Amin going to Congo and getting involved in gold businesses anyway. And so it was unconstitutional, it was unlawful. Political opponents of the government said Obote was involved. No, Obote wasn't, but Obote had sent Amin, that is true, on these operations. As Amin, as Deputy Army Commander, naturally, at this kind of level of operations, you send somebody at the kind of level to do so. And in any case, it was something for which Obote needs to get permanent medal every year, for supporting Congolese
independence.
Yeah, indeed.
So
Amin did that.
Amin engaged in the coup because, in any case, if he hadn't, his fate would be done. It was an action in self-preservation.
Indeed. And number two, he had killed Brigadier Okoye, because you're talking about the role of the army.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Brigadier Okoye was killed, and evidence had suggested Amin had done it. And so for those two reasons, Obote was to arrest and detain Idi Amin. But also, Okoye was killed because Amin believed that Brigadier Okoye was amongst the post-independence, well-trained, well-educated officers to take over the management and leadership of the army. This is very important. The Museveni's always like to sell this idea that previous armies did not have graduates or professions, things like that. No, it did have. Amin was a continuation of the colonial government, colonial army. So he was amongst the 4 captains at independence, whom the government inherited. So they had to continue.
Not as a choice of
precisely,
the UPC government.
Indeed, no. But
so the UPC continuation of the colonial order.
Indeed, but the UPC government then went ahead to recruit younger, fresher across the country army, because the colonial policy was also to recruit predominantly from the north and east, people whom they thought were tall, elegant, and strong for their army, basically soldiers for the British Empire. But now the Okoyas were soldiers for independent Uganda going forward. So Amin was going to be phased off anyway. So that's an important point. Obote II, Tito Okello and Basil Okello were also supposed to be retired in 1985 after the elections, which was 6 months away. So their overthrow was induced by NRA, NRM in the bush, the Democratic Party, DP, certain ranking clerics using them as the army. So the army did not do it on their own. Again, it was a deal. You're going to be retired. You better get off. But for Amin particularly, because that was important. Once the foreign forces told Amin that, look, this guy is coming back from Singapore to get rid of you. So you could as well. You could as well. Well, possibly did. Nature, he was told that, well, he's coming to overthrow you, but we can help you to overthrow. I mean, he's coming to detain you, so we can help you to take action before he does. So Amin did it in self-defense, in quote that.
So that's when you make quite a correlation, maybe to give us a bit more context. So the idea was that the Commonwealth at the moment was on some form of loggerheads or crossheads over the apartheid regime in South Africa. And that was America, and its ally Britain. And we know in the 60s, those countries were quite involved in who becomes president and which coup happens and which does. Even now, I think in West Africa, some coups are backed up by certain foreign forces. Is it your argument that there was a foreign hand?
It's not my argument. It is a fact. But in any case, actually, even
to give us more context,
even today in East Africa, many of the East African leaders are in power either because they were brought in by those forces or they've been maintained by those forces, and they're continuing to serve the interests of those forces, not independence. East Africa, certainly not in Uganda. Certainly Uganda inclusive, because the Ugandan regime continues to survive simply because it was predominantly backed by Anglo-America, but America is not part of the Commonwealth, has not been, but America is the eldest son of Britain, in that sense. But America's interest on this Commonwealth thing was because of apartheid South Africa. America were the number one backers of the white apartheid privileged regime in South Africa. America also at the time saw the fact that Cuba and the leftist governments, both led by China, and Russia, Soviet Union at the time, and leftist progressive movements in Africa committed from Nkrumah's Ghana, Milton Obote's Uganda, Nyerere's
Patrice Lumumba's liberation.
Yeah, but Lumumba had now been killed, but Lumumba's liberation movements were there. So these progressive left African nationalists were threatening the dominance of the whites' privilege in Southern Africa. So America saw it as their interest. But number two, because Cuba had got involved in Southern African liberation, you remember that actually Cuba contributed 100% to the liberation struggles in Southern Africa by basically beating out Cuban forces, critically with the Namibian, with the Angolan forces, beat out the apartheid South African forces in Angola. And once they defeated apartheid forces in Angola, the Boers had no option under the de Klerks to surrender by saying that, okay, let's go for talks. And that's important because somewhere Fidel Castro says that had they chosen, they had now the capacity to march onto South Africa and beat them up to Cape Town. So that's the American element. But the British element is basically the duo. Uganda was progressive left. We had nationalized key elements of the economy, and we were threatening to become the real economic shines of the region, and so therefore become genuinely independent. Unfortunately, young Africans will need to know that, since you're relating some of the things that was happening in West Africa, when we take our gold, when we have our uranium, when we own our coal, when we're in charge in the finished products in terms of our coffee, when we do the finished cotton products, including like my fantastic shirt here, which I got from Marks and Spencer's in Britain, but which shirt, we used to export to Britain under Obote I government, made from nitrile and ginger or African textile mill in Mbale, lest you forget. It means that, Uganda is a power, and Uganda does not only become a provider of raw materials to these people. Those are the things that African leaders need to do, but those are the things that the West predominantly stopped Africa from having. And once we had leaders like Nkrumah, he was overthrown and was beaten. And once we had leaders like Milton Obote, he was overthrown predominantly by external forces twice. But I just want to conclude this with
Thomas Sankara, or
indeed Sankara, Samora Machel, et al. But let me say that it would be unfair to conclude the main element without talking about the 1966 crisis, which involved Idi Amin, because people will think about yes. Amin was involved in the Mengo incident, the Lubiri incident, where people say that Milton Obote sent Amin to attack Lubiri. First, Lubiri was not attacked. There was a response in Lubiri. Number two, Amin went there as an army, as a last resort. In Lubiri, there was armed skirmish. In Lubiri, police had gone to Lubiri. Relationship between Milton Obote and the king, who was then president, let's not forget, president of the Republic, had become sour. And the Lokik of Buganda, bizarrely, had given Ugandan government, central government, ultimatum to leave Buganda soil. And at that time, I don't know whoever was president. I think Binti Wanuka would be very lucky because he was not prime minister at the time. So I don't know whoever the prime minister at the time. Buganda was just lucky that it was not Museveni, because I don't know whether 100 times of Kasese would have happened. But I'm not saying this lightly. I'm saying it to emphasize the point.
So that Ochiko had given ultimatums for secession to the Ugandan government.
Ugandan government, central government, to leave the soil of Buganda. Central government, which was headed ceremonially by the king. By the king. No, by the king. Remember, the king was the ceremonial president. Milton Obote was the executive prime minister, meaning granted the leader of government.
Obote and the technocrats were supposed to leave Uganda.
Precisely, meaning, basically, Uganda needed to end. But amidst that, the police went to Lubiri to investigate an armed skirmish. The police were shot at and killed. A police reinforcement was sent. At that time, I don't think they had special forces, but much more possibly specialized military armed police officers went, and they shot at. If you read Sir Edward's book, The Discretion of My Kingdom, part of it refers about how they came and how we dealt with them. So granted, it will tell you a semblance of the fact that the palace did not have rifles. The palace did not have sticks, batons. The palace was fully equipped.
It was fully armed, yeah.
Fully armed. So the escalation from the first police officers to the second tier of reinforcement, turning this thing into a real battle.
Necessitated a certain level of force.
Precisely. Yeah. And at that stage, to send the army, the prime minister had to send the then senior-most army officer. Remember, the army commander had already colluded with the king, Sir Edward, meaning Brigadier Pollock, for the record. So Idi Amin was the deputy army commander, the available next-tier officer, number one.
Without a conflict of interest.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. And again, without prejudice. And number two, Idi Amin, notwithstanding anything else you can say about him, on instruction by Milton Obote, and against on record. And Obote says this England to me, that whatever happens in Lubiri, whatever happens, please ensure the Kabaka is not harmed.
By instruction.
Meaning, so therefore, the army was going in the situation which had escalated Lubiri is within Kampala national capital and is within the Uganda's territorial enclave, as it were. So that's how Amin ended up in Lubiri, because I'm linking the army and their early mini track record. And so the Lubiri happened, and in any case, the Lubiri is Milton Obote's official regret. I speak also partly as a spokesperson. His regret in the two administrations of the Lubiri incident. But was it started by him? Was it started by UPC as a party? Was it started by UPC government? No. This is something that the independent Uganda inherited on 9th October 1962, and is something that we tried to resolve through the referendum of 1964 over the lost counties, and it did not resolve it. We tried to do so much to support Sir Edward to become the king, the president of the Republic of Uganda, against the wishes of our own vice president, who was the king of Busoga. The Chabazinga of Busoga wanted to become the first president. The Chabazinga met with members of the Democratic Party in Mbarara. So DP, a predominantly Chiganda and Buganda-dominated political party, main opposition party at the time, supported the Chabazinga of Busoga to become the first president of Uganda against the UPC, who supported Sir Edward. So again, lest we forget for the record, who really was Buganda's best friend and who really is for Buganda. Because I suggest that today I would still support Sir Edward, except I would advise him to take a different approach and to recognize the limitations of the kingdom, which is a kingdom within a nation state, as it were. And that was basically that. So that was basically...
So your argument is Buganda had exceeded the limits of what a kingdom within a nation state can do. Maybe then to juxtapose it to the question, which is going to be the last question we concentrate on Uganda is a very diverse state, very different tribes, former kingdoms, some that are annexed by German and British conquest, some are off the map. Do you think that the need to collapse or the need for individual cultural institutions to cede their autonomy to this now creation, the nation state, was a very fundamental policy to entrench republicanism that now had become a reality we had to embrace as a country post-1962?
It was an imperative. It is an imperative. And again, for the record, to put it in context, all the kingdoms of Uganda actively worked together with the rest of the Republican Uganda, to push for our independence. All the kingdoms of Uganda today, including those that Museveni has made sure that they don't exist, including the kingdom of Ankole, for whatever the dynamics, and whether or not Kigezi also had a kingdom, whatever the case.
There were several.
But those are some of the privileged status, including my Tororo, which did not have kings, but now there's some mini king creations, but we'll go into that. People work towards independence. Why? It's because I told at the beginning that the fight for independence was very much about purely emancipation of the African personality on this land, that we take ownership, that we chart our destiny, that we turn around the opportunities and possibilities for our lots, including our children, health, education, agriculture, food security, infrastructure, and also, therefore, including the environment, to make sure that Uganda and its capital, Kampala, or wherever that capital is not the most polluted city, Kampala, it is today for the rest of the world. So therefore, that the children of Uganda must have the same, if not better, opportunities compared to children of Kenya and Tanzania. And we did. As of the time when Idi Amin took over, we had the best civil service on the continent, officially. It's not surprising that Amin managed to rule using our civil servants up to about 1976-77, before the nation collapsed, because that is how good it is. I'm told that we had amongst the best intelligence services. I met a former intelligence officer, intelligence meaning police intelligence, by the way, who were operating like FBI strokes, basically like FBI,
Yeah, sure.
in terms of their operations.
Like Mossad, FBI.
That is how professional they were. But they were public organizations, not organizations that chase people's girlfriends under the beds, or who is the next other person who wants to put in a red shirt or a blue shirt rather than singing Nyong Nyong Yellow. So that we did have. We had amongst the best education outcomes on this continent. Makerere University was then called the Harvard of Africa. I can go on and on and on. And our coffee plant in Bugolobi, which was been turned into a shell slum, was the second best, most productive, most effective in the world, following one in Brazil. I don't remember which town. Now, that is what our founding parents were saying. We want to go into those directions and make sure that we compete with the rest of the world, and emancipate our peoples. Now, the recognition, therefore, was that we're going to do this in diversity, knowing very well that we divided like sweets in 1884, the Berlin Conference. So Berlin Conference divided us like sweets. So they divided monarchies, they divided kingdoms, they divided communities. But how do we, in a sensible way, like we're asking Buganda Kingdom to look forward in context and in diversity, how do we do this? We did that by saying Buganda, Bunyoro, Ankole, Kigezi, Busoga, Lango, Acholi, Karamoja, et al., my book inclusive, that our leaders from those communities together came in solidarity. And some of these leaders, so leading to our independence negotiations, we had all at once, because it was all about the livelihood of our people. I say what Milton Obote told me one time, that Joe, hospitals don't know tribes. Schools don't know political parties or religion. So you just do this about the livelihood of all our peoples and their emancipation. So it would be a commonsensical thing that the king of Buganda would recognize that the children of Busoga are as much human beings as the privileged children of Buganda. And so they're partners and they're neighbors, and they can live together side by side with one another. But what is that creation with the political creation that makes them one? And one thing also is that the king of Buganda recognizes that in a new post-independence world, post-colonial world, we are not going to live like those kingdoms of those days, where you're going to fight for territory, whether you capture one from Bunyoro or whatever. Nor is it going to be the one in which you trade with the neighboring clan, like what happens in Somalia, as if they're strangers. It's just a commonsensical thing. I have told friends that the most powerful kingdom on the African continent is the Zulu kingdom. But I've not heard the last time when the Zulu threatened to take over Pretoria, or Johannesburg, or to demand for seats in Parliament. It is simply that a cultural king, a cultural institution
can exist
coexist, and they
state.
emphasize the cultural diversity and the need of their people, and to make sure that, look, they tell the political leaders that, look, you guys, we need to make sure that the young men and women that we send to you as our representatives, make sure they're able to provide health, education, and infrastructure in our communities.
End of story.
And that end of story. And that, by the way, those are things that they should even be saying in private, in any case. And they know that, look, if you annoy the chief of Nagongara, meaning Ochieno from my Koepangara clan, next time you pass, you won't get votes. So that's what it is. But also in diversity in terms of Uganda, the leaders from the more Republican communities who did not have kings, or even if they're called chiefs, they lived side by side and they worked together. So we went ahead and negotiated for independence, and we got our independence.
And they live in harmony. They
did.
Should secede.
And I want to say this because I need to emphasize this, that I have got friends in Buganda Kingdom, and I can tell you that I also tell my young friends in Buganda that this is the richest, the largest, the most powerful, the most sophisticated, the coolest monarchy around with very fantastic language, banange, banafe, abantu bange, in webarinyo abantu bange. Beautiful people. That most of Uganda looks up to, and when you find and fantastic, embrace. So you don't do that through arrogance or coercion. You celebrate your strength and power. That's where the base is. I have told people that people who then use political nuances to break us as communities, they make bad what would otherwise be good to be celebrated. So the Kingdom of Uganda, the largest nation, the largest identity, the largest community in our country, should be celebrated side by side with 10 little Allure, side by side with 10 little Bakonjo, side by side with the 10 little J somewhere in the corner of Karamoja. And that in diversity, we're able to live together and to engage and to share.
That's our collective fate. I'm not sure whether we can go back to kingdom. It would be like 50 states.
That's actually my point. So we must realize that possibilities of kingdoms being nation states are sort of really gone. And I think people need to politically be blunt about it. As I said, I took the Zulu thing and I accept the reality. How best do we do this so that we're able to live in harmony? In fact, the sooner we did that, the quicker it will be possible for us to invest in our diversity, make the best use of our diversity, become serious East Africans, reclaim Africa as a continent, and reclaim African identity from a Pan-Africanist perspective, so that when we go to Brazil, we see our brothers and sisters in Brazil as one people, and we enjoy the pride.
And benefit from them. I think those have been very, very important contexts about how UPC has contributed to Ugandan civilization. Do you have any parting shots you would like to tell the audience, maybe on how UPC wants to continue to contribute to the project Uganda?
I just want to say that particularly younger Ugandans need to continue revisiting the founding values of Uganda National Congress, which was then led by Ignatius Musazi in the late 40s and early 50s. This was a movement of Ugandans that were pushing to make sure that we had fair prices for our products, fair wages for workers, and that we were also on the national table, and that we do not have a director who's a Mzungu, and imagine Asia who's an Asian, and basically the African in Uganda is merely a cleaner. If that is the case, a UPC government of the future would reject the idea that today, while we have Chinese contractors, working on our roads, that the only thing that an average Ugandan can do is to push a wheelbarrow. That I reject, and I think a future UPC government would make sure that does not happen. Why? Because we'd also be able to make sure that we did like Mukalasi Technical Services. Those of you who remember when it was, once upon we used to have the likes of Mukalasi Technical Services, but they were Rocos. But never would a UPC government take 500 billion Uganda shillings and give it to a Western European construction company, which is a private entity, and take that money from health and education. What these NRA guys did more recently is complete anti-independence, and I think it shows that now we have dealers in government rather than leaders who should be able to help us push towards independence. And that in the future, one of the things we'll do is that most of our independence leaders were very young people. Young Ugandans should be interested. They should get involved. They should be even part of our history. We should go back in diversity. A UPC government, as I said, will do make sure that, the Kigezi College, Butawero, that we built, a young child comes from Kigezi College and then able to go to Bukedi College, Kachonga, and that by the time they go for their A-levels, perhaps they go to their Teso College, Alloy, all built by Uganda People's Congress. But make sure that when they come from there, they're able to go back to the University of Science and Technology in Barara, which was a foundation by Uganda People's Congress, although complete by and NRM. And that when they complete from that university, they've got a guarantee for a job in Masaka Hospital, that they've got a job guarantee for an opportunity somewhere in Nakasongola. And if some of them are engineers, that they're able to build a Karuma bridge that lasts for 100 years. And when that Karuma bridge has got faults, it's not locked and closed, and people are expected to fly like birds.
For months, I don't know when that bridge is going to come through. And thank you so much, Mr. Ochieno, Joseph, for that context. To our viewer, we hope you love the context on how UPC has been a foundational pillar to Uganda's democracy. And what we do is to give you the information, and I think the choice will be yours to appreciate where this project Uganda comes from and how you can be a part of it. Please find our podcast on all your favorite podcasting platforms. It could be YouTube, Center for Policy Analysis, or it could be Podbean or Samsung, Boomplay, Spotify, Apple, wherever you just get your podcasting platforms. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Policy Digest, a Center for Policy Analysis podcast that explores how African societies are governed and how people and their leaders are shaping the future of their communities. For more podcasts, check out our Podbean and YouTube platforms. Thank you.